So you've seen the announcements.
We are really thrilled to be announcing Microsoft Fabric. This is a product that we've been working very, very hard on over multiple years, and it's finally coming together. It's perhaps the biggest launch of a data product from Microsoft since the launch of SQL Server.
You've seen the posts on LinkedIn, and you still don't really know what is Fabric. Well, in this video, I'm going to be going through all the different elements of Microsoft Fabric, what they are, what you can really do with them, and how you can pull these together into some sort of coherent solution for your organization or for your department. Now, Fabric was released about a week ago, and luckily that coincided with some time off that I had from work. So my day job is I'm a data consultant, working mainly in the data stack, in Microsoft Data Stack. So I've had some time to really delve into these solutions here in Microsoft Fabric and understand the potential, cut through some of the hype, and that's what I'm going to be trying to do in this video to help you understand in a bit more detail what Fabric is. So when we first log into Fabric, this is what it looks like. It's divided into these 6 different experiences. Probably familiar with lots of them. You've got Power BI, you've got Data Factory, we've got Data Engineering, Data Science, Data Warehouse, Real-Time Analytics. But what do these actually mean? These are kind of personas, these are experiences, these are groups of different tools. So if we cut down to the iPad here, I've tried to explain, I'm going to go through each one in detail, and you can see what you can do behind each of these tiles. So let's start off with Data Factory. Let's pull that down here. And with Data Factory, there's 2 real options. We've got Dataflow Gen 2. If you're a Power BI user, you're probably already familiar with this. And it allows you to write Power Query, or you don't have to write it, but like with the user interface, you can build Power Query, and it's here for ETL. We can grab data from lots and lots of different connectors, SQL databases, any sort of database really, REST API, HTTP, all these different things, transform it in some way. And the key innovation with Gen 2, which they've fairly recently, rolled out, and it's built for Fabric. And that allows you to add a data destination. So that's pretty cool, and we'll get into that, what that might look like further on into the video. So we can pull data from here, we can transform it a bit, and we can set a data destination, which could be in our data warehouse, or it could be in a lakehouse, for example, which will be part of the data engineering, and we'll see that in detail. The second element of Data Factory is the data pipeline. So if you're used to ADF pipelines, these are very similar. They're streamlined a little bit. And by that I mean, you can only really do copy data activities, you can do some like control flow logic, if, then, switch statements, that kind of thing. But it allows you to basically, again, take data from one location, do some transformations, and then write it out to another area in Fabric. So that's the Data Factory elements. And as we start to go through each of these elements, it'll hopefully become a bit clearer how this all ties together. So next, we've got the data engineering experience. And available to us here, we've got 4 things. We've got a lakehouse, a Spark job, a notebook, and the data pipeline. And as you can already see, this one is built on top of Spark. So you can create things like tables in a lakehouse. And you can also have regular files. These could be Parquet files, could be all sorts of different file formats. But really, we're writing Spark. The engine underneath this is Spark. So it allows you to process really big data, like petabytes, terabytes of data. Obviously, you can create Spark jobs that are going to allow you to schedule these like data transformations or data cleaning routines that you've got. And you're going to write these in notebooks. And because it's built on top of the Spark engine, you can basically write PySpark if you want. You can also write it in R. There's also Spark SQL. Oops. Or Scala. So you can write in lots of different languages to achieve your goal. From a data engineering perspective, this could be building scripts or notebooks that clean data, that do some sort of transformations, do maybe feature engineering if you're working before a data scientist and you want to help them with that. The last point is the data pipeline. This is copied over from the data factory experience, and it just helps us get data into the lakehouse. So if you've got data in a data warehouse, you can build a pipeline that reads that data, transforms it, stores it in your lakehouse, ready for you to then pull into a notebook and do further transformations in any of these languages. So that's the data engineering aspect at a very high level. Moving on, we've got data science. So let's have a look at what we can do in the data science section. We can see we've got three main tools at our disposal here. We've got a notebook, which is similar. It's a Spark notebook and allows us to do what maybe as a data scientist, you might be doing EDA in a notebook. You might be doing some sort of feature engineering. Basically, it's a scrapbook. You can, try lots of things, explore the data a bit, all the things that a data scientist might want to do. Once you've explored the data a bit, you might want to build a machine learning model and test it against some evaluation metrics. Now, you might have several models. You might want to be testing whether this random forest model is better than this logistic regression model, for example. And for each model, you might have various hyperparameters that you want to test. So the experiment section is, as the name suggests, is for testing ML models against some sort of evaluation criteria, depending on the goal and the problem that you're trying to solve with this experiment. And then once you've found a model that you like, it performs well against some evaluation criteria, and you've got a set of weights, then you can publish that as a saved model. And in the Models tab, like I mentioned, you have this concept of a model registry. So if you want to share a trained model with someone in your organization, that's where you're going to do that. And again, these models can then be used for things like inference. So you can, in this section, write predictions from your ML model back to a lakehouse. So that might be a use case that you can use there. So let's go back to our top section here and pick the next one, which is the data warehouse. So in the data warehouse persona, obviously we're going to be able to create a data warehouse and a data pipeline. Again, the data pipeline is for just getting data into our data warehouse. And the data warehouse allows us to write T-SQL queries as you would be used to. But there's no concepts now of things like dedicated pools or anything that came with kind of the Synapse SQL side of things. It's all just simply data warehouse now. So in here, you can write your views, stored procedures, all that good stuff there. Now, how this might fit together in an organization, if you're targeting some sort of medallion architecture, you might have your bronze here as a lake house. Then, and that's going to be your raw data, right? You might have another lake house for your silver. This is going to be cleaned in some way. Maybe you've built some notebooks that clean this data. And then at the end of the pipeline, you might have your data warehouse, which is your gold. And this is for curated data sets that are going to be probably queried by your Power BI. So these two are probably more geared to your data engineer and your data scientist, but your data warehouse is where you want to be curating the best data sets for your analysts in your organization. Give them nice clean data sets that they can plug into their Power BI. And it does integrate directly with Power BI. You can create reports from directly within Data Warehouse, very simply. So as we mentioned, the important thing to note here is that it's built on top of the T-SQL engine. And there's lots of engines here, and I'll be going through that in a bit more detail shortly, how they all integrate. So the last one we've got here is real-time analytics. Now in the real-time space, we've got three kind of assets that we can create, three resources. And you'll see that that's built on top of KQL, Custo Query Language. Now that comes from Azure Data Explorer, if you're familiar with that tool. And again, this is where you're going to be analyzing and storing real-time data. So you can create things like event streams. And with that, really we're going to be integrating probably with Azure Event Hubs. I think you can also pull in blob storage for kind of long-term storage of streaming data. So there is still some connection with Azure. You might be thinking, well, hang on a minute. All of this stuff is now available as a SaaS product. Do I even need Azure? Well, if you want to do real time, then you definitely do need Azure still. You're going to be using event hubs, registering IoT streams, for example. So you are still going to need that. So the final thing to note is Power BI, and that's basically the same as before, but it's fully integrated into this solution now. It has lots of friends. It's got data engineering, it's got data science, and these all sit within the same workspace. So let's just dig into an example here. I just want to mention another really important concept, and it might be the most innovative thing about Fabric, really. And that's this concept of the OneLake. You might have heard about it. So the way that they're selling this, Microsoft, is you have OneDrive for your documents, and now you have OneLake for your data. There's two things to remember with OneLake. There's only ever one lake for one organization, and you shouldn't really be copying data within that lake. Now, a common pattern, if you've been using Azure Data Factory, for example, is you copy data from here, put it in here, copy data here, put it in here. And this kind of is really wasteful and expensive if you're doing it every day and lots of high volumes of data. So with a OneLake, all of your data sits in this OneLake. And all of these different database types that we've explored here, your data warehouse, your lakehouse, your KQL database, they'll sit in this OneLake, and they sit in Delta format. And this is an open source storage format that allows us to do some pretty cool things, really. Now, because everything is written and read in the same format, we can do things like, we have a data pipeline. I want to read some data from a data warehouse. Maybe I want to transform it a bit more. So we're reading Delta into our data pipeline. We're transforming it. And then we might want to write it into the lakehouse. And that's possible because everything is kind of stored in this Delta format. There's interfaces and there's engines that all interface with this Delta format. And that's one of the most powerful things about Fabric to understand. Another key point here is that it helps customers feel a bit safer. All of their data is in an open format. So if in 10 years' time they want to jump ship and move to a different product, their data is stored not in proprietary formats anymore, but in open source formats. Now that's not to say that they'll make it easy for you or cheap, but it's an option. So now let's look at how all of this gets brought together. in an organization. So as we mentioned before, we have our OneLake. That's where everything is going to live, all of our data. And we have these resources that we've been mentioning here. You might have a data pipeline. You might have a report, data warehouse, a notebook, all of this good stuff. And there's this concept of a workspace. So this logical grouping here is a workspace. And that might be, for example, UK sales. Now you might have another workspace here. Again, everything sits on top of the OneLake, but this workspace could be Ireland sales, for example. So the workspace is just a logical grouping of resources, but it also helps us with access and user management. So if you're this person here, then if I'm a member of this workspace, then they can interact with and see this data and have a look at these things very easily. There's 4 different roles in a workspace, and I'll be going through those in a bit more detail, but it's got your member, contributor, admin, that kind of thing. And we'll be going through those in a future video. Now, obviously, if this person is not a member of the Ireland sales workspace, then they're not going to be able to view the resources or data that lives within them. On the level above the workspace, we have this concept of a domain. Now, a domain is just a grouping of workspaces, but to follow through our example here, this might be global sales. And you might have another domain over here, which is recruitment, for example. And you might have another one for engineering, whatever. So your organization is going to be subdivided into these different domains depending on the structure of your organization. Now, domains are interesting for 2 reasons, really. Number 1 is because it allows you to do data governance at the domain level. Now, each department probably has their own set of rules and regulations that they have to adhere to from a data governance perspective, from a regulation. And so domains allows them to basically set things like classification of data, sensitivity levels at the domain level for everything underneath them, depending on maybe different regulations, statutory requirements, that sort of thing. And that brings me to Purview, which is another element of Fabric, which is it's its product in its own right, but they've integrated it into Fabric. And that's basically, again, for unified data governance solution. It's where you're going to be looking at things like sensitivity levels, look at data lineage, look at security, and how these things proliferate from data sources through your transformation pipelines. Also things like masking and all that good stuff. So that's Purview. And again, I'll be doing lots more videos about data governance because it's kind of, previously it was an add-on, let's say, in the Microsoft data stack. You can have it if you want, and if you want to pay quite a lot of money for Purview. But now it's kind of deeply embedded into the whole Microsoft fabric. So that's going to provide a lot of interesting opportunities for companies that want to get more into data governance. The second point about domains that I want to mention is that it's quite a strategic decision because it allows Microsoft, or it allows customers of Microsoft to take advantage of data mesh architecture. Now, this has been talked about a lot, but it's been very difficult to achieve. I think it took Microsoft 3.5 years to build their own internal data mesh architecture. And if you're not familiar with data mesh architecture, it's basically a move from centralized data to distributed data in your organization. So each department, so maybe this is HR, this is engineering. Previously, all the data in your organization was stored here, centrally, with IT maybe. In the data mesh architecture, the data is stored in each of these departments. They manage their data themselves, how it's structured, how it's transformed, how it's tested or validated, and also how they present it to other departments. So the engineering department might need data from the HR department or recruitment, for example. And previously, there's kind of two elements to this. There's the technological, how do we actually make this a reality? And then there's the human aspect. So how do we get the HR department up to a capability and to understand why they need to manage their data and how to transform it and how to present it and validate it. Obviously, with Fabric, the technology piece becomes simple. And as they introduce more functionality to domains, which I expect them to do in the future, it's going to become a lot easier. So that's the technology piece. Obviously, it's not going to solve the human piece, which is more like organizational design and philosophy. How do we prepare our organizations for this shift in thinking? But we'll worry about that when we get to it. So the final piece I wanted to mention was the integration with Git. You might have heard about this one. So now we can basically use Git for version control via Azure DevOps. And this allows us to basically write Power BI reports, PBIX files to Git and track changes through that and update changes in your organization through that. That's only available currently for the Power BI reports. In the future, but not currently available, they will do the same for Lakehouse and data pipelines and everything else basically within that stack. Now, one thing I did want to mention here in this same vein, these are tools for lifecycle management. And the other thing for lifecycle management is deployment pipelines. Previously, it was challenging to manage Azure resources like Synapse and data warehouses, your data lake storage, all these kind of different stuff in a deployment pipeline. So how do we manage their development through things like different stages, like test and prod, development stages? So deployment pipeline, again, is built into Fabric. So it allows us to specify this lakehouse is in production, and if we want to make changes to it, then it's going to have to go through that dev, test, prod type staging pipeline. So that's a really cool feature there that, again, I'm going to be going through in lots more detail, all of these different things. But that is basically a whistle-stop tour of everything available to you in Fabric. Now, appreciate there's a lot there. There's lots to get through. There's so much, in fact, that I thought it deserved its own YouTube channel. So this is my first video. If you like the way that I presented this information and you want to hear more and you want to see more and learn more about Microsoft Fabric, make sure you're subscribed, like this video, leave a comment below if I've got anything wrong. Like, I've probably got some stuff wrong here. Or if there's any future videos that you want me to make, then let me know. See you in the next one.